It's time for the online dinner party, and as usual, we've invited a lot of guests. We're going to see if they show up or if they don't show up or all along those lines, but it'll definitely be an interesting conversation, and we're looking forward to seeing what they've got to say and their world and all of that. I do know that at least one of them did say that they will not be able to make it, but there are two or three others that I am expecting to make it, so we're going to see when they show up and how they show up and what we can talk about all in that space and all along those lines. There's a number of things happening in the world. I do want to share some of that with you. Of course, we've got a pre recorded interview that we may bring you also before our guests get here and all along those lines. So, I'm going to share with you some of the things that I found out in terms of some of the information that's out there and some of the things that you might be interested in as well. So Goldman has cut COVID rules in an RTO push. That's right, Goldman Sachs will no longer require most employees to wear masks or be vaccinated against COVID-19, according to a memo obtained by the Wall Street Journal. The investment bank is also dropping testing requirements, citing significantly less risk of severe illness for the changes which take effect on Tuesday. CEO David Solomon has been a vocal critic of remote work at Goldman Sachs, calling it an aberration that we are going to correct as quickly as possible during a forum last year. New York City based employees will still need an approved vaccination exemption, CNBC reports. Meanwhile, the memo encourages employees to determine current reform to office expectations by talking with their supervisors. J. Morgan Chase is still allowing employees to work a hybrid schedule, but CEO Jamie Dimon has signaled his displeasure with the arrangement. By the way, Steve Robbins, who is part of leadership at a company and everything, said Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon is demonstrating that he may be great with spreadsheets, but he's questionable at his competence at being a leader of people. He is, of course, demanding RTO return to office, but there's no mention of putting actual health measures in place. I understand his drive for RTO. He wants to feel powerful and important. I get it. I regularly hire actors to wear surf costumes and worship me as I step from my home office to the front porch to grab my mail. It's a rush like no other, and it requires in person worship. Yeah, I think he was being very sarcastic with that remark, this particular gentleman. You know what else is a rush for me, but not from Mr. Solomon? Competence. Indoor production is well understood, good ventilation, 6 times air exchanges per hour, MERV 13 or better filtration, and some degree of masking. Unfortunately, CEOs like David Solomon are long on RTO temper tantrums and short on actually protecting his workforce. The executive me has to question whether or not I can consider someone to be a competent leader when they literally put their employees in physical danger for no reason except ego. This attitude of we can't inconvenience businesses by asking for precautions, but we're happy to expose workers to risk of acute short-term disease or chronic long COVID, which has disabled at least two friends of this particular author to the point where they can't work, is morally reprehensible. If companies were being held responsible for COVID workplace safety the way they are for OSHA-style workplace safety, we would see RTO accompanied by genuine health measures. So that was one response that we heard. Rachel Vendreska, a senior audience editor at Fortune, said Goldman Sachs is doing away with COVID restrictions. The investment banking giant has been a big advocate of bringing people back into the office, setting it apart from other companies in finance and tech that are leaning more towards a hybrid work style. Starting September 6th, employees of Goldman Sachs will be allowed to enter the office regardless of vaccination status and will no longer be required to test for COVID-19 or wear a mask. So this is some interesting news coming from the folks at Goldman Sachs as we go into a more commercial style of life and all of that, and a more hybrid style of life as more and more people are going back to work, and sometimes from home, sometimes from the actual office environment, and all along those lines. So that is one of the news stories that I saw that might be of interest to people and that they might be interested in learning more about. By the way, speaking of jobs, Open Jobs made a big leap. And that's another story that we're seeing is that Open Jobs made a surprise jump in July. The number of available positions in the U.S. rose close to a record, confounding expectations for the fall as a historically tight labor market grew stronger. Jobs rose to 11.2 million from 11 million in June, which was itself revised higher, the Labor Department reported in its job openings and labor turnover survey. Quits, or the number of times Americans voluntarily left their jobs, edged down to 4.2 million, or a 1 year low of 2.7%. All in all, there were still 2 jobs for every unemployed person, up from 1.9 in June. Allison Lands, who is a skilled evangelist, said employers need to be playing chess, not checkers, with this labor market and economic cycle. Having a broad and deep view of your organization's skills footprint allows leaders to optimize their existing headcount, craft strategic yet agile workforce plans, and tune L&D programs to shift incompetent workers into highest and best use, retain them longer, and shift their lifetime employer value curves upward. It was If it was job seekers without a degree, the majority of the job seekers, I'd aim for an employer that publicly supported hiring stars at median industry wages or higher, and one that also funds post-secondary training and degrees for its front lines, and use that training to pursue a digital credential that upleveled my career trajectory and earning potential. In a tight labor market, this is a real threat to college, and one that institutions should think about leaning into. Employees are the most effective source of workforce development we have in a tight labor market, and we still need companies to avail themselves of every lever available to them to shape this incumbent workforce so that workforce developers can focus on recruiting marginalized and discouraged workers into the labor force and reskilling them as needed. So that is one of the things that we were seeing in that particular news story and along those lines. So always glad to get some good comments from different people. And of course, we love using LinkedIn as one of our sources of news and all of that. Jordan Rosner actually added, I'm not too surprised about the education sector. Many teachers, even those teaching for years, are leaving that sector for good. Things are getting very difficult for professionals in that field. We need to come together and provide a stronger support system for our education providers. There is no doubt about that. I would agree with him on that, and I hope that you will as well. Sarah Malik, a chief investment officer at Novin, a TIA company, said that in the third installment of Novin's Bear Trackers, a tool we developed to help inform discussion and debate around this year's bear market dynamic, we're focused on federal policies and what investors should be looking for in the wake of Fed Chair Jerome Powell's Jackson Hole comments last Friday. Market participants, hoping the 2022 bear market bottom had been reached, were thrown overboard like whitewater rafters hit by Class V waves on the Snake River, a stone's throw from where the world's top central bankers met. Among the main obstacles for markets, inflation remains at unacceptable levels and requires continued forceful policy measures. In other words, don't expect a pivot from the federal navigators anytime soon. The modest softening of but a few data points over the summer was simply not enough to convince central banks that inflation was truly under control, and given the resilience of the labor market in particular, we suspect future employment data to further reinforce the hawkish message from Jackson Hole. In fact, this morning, job openings and labor turnover survey revealed that July's data outpaced expectations by over 900,000, putting the total number of job openings back over 11 million and the ratio of job openings to the number of unemployed people at 2 to 1, matching the peak of the current employment cycle. With more employment data to be reported this week, investors should secure their rafting gear and prepare for further choppy waters ahead. The Feds will continue to make policy decisions based on income and economic data over an extended period of observation. And because the economy remains strong enough to support the Fed's aggressive policy stance, we are likely in for further rate hikes and potentially higher downside risk for markets. So they were asking, how are you personally preparing for that volatility and all along those lines? Don't forget, Shirley Lou, one of our show hosts, was talking about some of this on her show that she does regularly on Tuesdays. So keep that in mind as a show that you can catch regularly here on the network at around 1 o'clock. So keep that in mind as a source to learn about how to deal with some of these overturns and some of the things that are going on in that space. So always glad to have those conversations and all along those lines. By the way, it is very hot weather that we're having here in North Carolina. I know that more and more people are getting out. I'm even seeing people that are doing events. As a matter of fact, I'm over at the Hayes Heritage Center where there's a women's conference going on, and it is with some grassroots organizers and all along those lines. So glad to be able to be in this space and to share a number of things that are going on in the world. I know a lot of people are glad to be getting out. Of course, the school kids are back to school. Don't know how my nephews are feeling about that, but they are back in school and all along those lines. I'm going to actually bring up a couple of commercial spots and all of that, and then see if our guests are on the way. And if not, we might bring up an interview that we did not that long ago that y'all might find interesting as well. But right now, let's check out about leukemia and what is going on in some of that research right now.
Maybe, okay, so you're recording.
Yes.
Okay, maybe say, hi, my name is Brooklyn.
My name is Brooklyn. This is my identical twin sister, Alyssa. And this is my pet bearded dragon, Smaug. I love my dragon a whole lot. I would describe myself as very passionate. I love to write. I like to play the violin. I remember getting the biopsy results in my sister's bedroom. Diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. I had just turned 21. I was terrified on my first day of treatment, and before I knew it, I was getting continuous chemo for 96 hours straight. But none of it was working. At that point, we realized that we couldn't pass up any opportunities, and we had to take every moment that we could. So one of the things we did was take time for me and my sister to go find me a wedding dress. Not because I was getting married, but just to have the experience and to be able to find that perfect dress with my sister and share that moment together, since we knew that we couldn't guarantee it anymore. We were trying to learn everything we could about my diagnosis. That's why we went to LLS's blood cancer conference. And from that day on, LLS just became a big part of our lives. They helped me find meaning through volunteering and sharing my story. And they just gave me a blood cancer family. I thank LLS the most for funding my clinical trial. Getting the compassionate acceptance was really exciting, but my goodness, it was rough. And I finally got a remission. I relapsed less than 3 months later. We were sitting on a concrete bench outside the hospital thinking, why did we ever do this? A lot of feelings of defeat. I just kept asking how. How could we have done all of this? None of it mattered then. I still had cancer. So here we are. I've received all the standard treatments and even the newest blood cancer advances. And the only option now is treatment that just might slow down the cancer and buy a little bit of time. It's really hard to watch yourself get sicker. If you're not in the hospital for chemo, you're there because you have fluid in your chest or have another infection or need another blood transfusion. I'm exhausted and my family is exhausted. But I love my family and I love living life with them. We're relying on something better, more research. You give us the hope that we're hanging on to for my life. LLS calls me an honored hero, but really, you're my heroes.
Every time I see that one, what a powerful message. What a powerful message about survival, about trying to cope with a very bad situation and all of that. But definitely a lot of heroes are needed. I know that I was glad to help not once but twice with two fundraisers that my good friend Tim Song was doing to deal with leukemia and lymphoma and all of that. So he was actually running for Man of the Year there in Pennsylvania, and I was honored to be involved in two of those. Also honored earlier today to be on a show with Christine where we were talking about aging and all along those lines. So definitely always some amazing things happening in the live stream space as well as on LinkedIn and in a number of other spaces also. So definitely that is something that we are very proud to talk about, be involved in, and all along those lines. So definitely I was glad to be participating in that and look forward to participating in some more later on and all in that space. But definitely that was a very powerful message, and I know one that a lot of people were glad to be involved with, glad to be part of, and all of that, because I was not the only live streamer. There were a number of others as well. So maybe we'll get involved again in that next year. But definitely it was a very powerful thing that we did earlier, and am possibly going to do it again this year or in the not too distant future and all of that. I know that we even talk of being involved with some of the stuff that goes on in that same space here in North Carolina. I've actually got to get in touch with them and see if that is still a possibility, and if so, when we can do that and how we can do that, and all in that line of thought. But definitely very powerful message that was done by many, and definitely, always good when people are willing to lend their support to what is going on in a lot of struggles and a lot of things that are taking place in that struggle space and all along those lines. So definitely I was glad to participate in that. Look forward to participating in some more as well. So definitely that is something that folks may be thinking about, just like maybe thinking about the historic drop in the U.S. life expectancy. Yes, there is a historic drop in the life expectancy of those of us here in the United States. I imagine part of that is around COVID and around some of the things to deal with COVID, but we'll find out more about that particular news story that I'm going to bring to you right now as well. That's right. They are saying that there is a historic drop in the U.S. life expectancy and all along those lines. And definitely it's always interesting to see that. But life expectancy in the U.S. has dropped once again, decreasing since 2019 from an average of 79 years to 76 years, according to federal health researchers. The past 2 years have shown the steepest decline in the last century, in what Virginia Commonwealth University's Dr. Stephen Wolf describes as a historic drop. Native Americans and Alaska Natives in particular saw a sharp drop, with life expectancies in this group falling by more than 6.5 years to an average of 65 years. COVID was the main cause of decline in life expectancy in the U.S., but other factors, including drug abuse and heart disease, also were contributing factors. So they also contributed as well. So definitely Eric Bricker, an MD and a medical director for Simple Pay Health, said U.S. life expectancy continues to decline. And he was actually saying something about 49,000 deaths per year, up 6,000% since '99. And he was also saying more than breast cancer and auto fatalities. We saw this firsthand at Compass Light Solutions, at least one substance abuse treatment referral request per week, almost always due to prescription drugs. What you take on reduced life expectancy? Do you think that there are other causes? So he was actually asking some interesting questions, and it might be interesting what others have to say about that as well. Rusty Clark, who calls himself a proud father, grandpa, and a Marine Corps veteran, and a realtor, said that anyone who has had a family member in the hospital will not be shocked by this. The profit over care mentality has crippled the ability of doctors to care properly for their patients. Patient portals have taken the place of one-on-one consultations, and often patients have to resort to self-diagnosis to try to help the doctor find the root issue, because the doctor is rushed and doesn't remember them from one appointment to the next. That is if you get any time with an actual doctor, as most of the time is now spent with a nurse, with the doctor signing off at the end. I do not think that the government should take over, but they do need to deeply be involved with ensuring that the medical industry does a far better job of balancing care over profit. He was also saying that was just his humble opinion, having watched the care or lack of his 75-year-old mother had over the past 2 years. And as an update, he said, I see a lot of comments blaming care of the fact that middle class can't afford quality insurance. That's not it at all. My mother had great insurance. It's the profit-minded focus on plowing through as many patients a day as they can. Again, he did admit that was just his opinion. If you're not a big name, you would get the same poor care as everyone else. And Carol Harnett, a speaker and a writer and a health and disability consultant, said although the U.S. healthcare system is among the best in the world, Americans suffer from what experts have called the U.S. health disadvantage, and amalgam of influencers that erode well-being. Dr. Wolf said this includes a fragmented, profit-driven healthcare system, poor diet, and a lack of physical activity, and pervasive risk factors such as smoking, widespread access to guns, poverty, and pollution. The problems are compounded for marginalized groups by racism and segregation, he added. So definitely some of those things play a factor as well. And then Bill Rubin, a senior manager at Standard Proposals and Sales Operations, said shocking confirmation of the devastation that COVID and underlying negative healthcare practices have had on the USA. A 3-year drop in life expectancy to 2019 is huge and unprecedented, maybe like the GDP falling 15% in 3 years. A shocking commentary on the state of health in our country, and in my view is correlated with the broader trends and negative activities we see. Shocking results for the wealthiest country in the world. This should jolt all leaders into thoughtful action. What is to be done? And we even heard the president talking about some cancer research and other things that he would like to be seeing done at a couple of times. I think he brought it up in his campaign. I know he brought it up at the State of the Union and a couple of other times as well. But what actions, and this is Mark speaking, have we seen in that regards and all along those lines? It is one thing to say that you're going to do something. It's another thing to actually get it done and all of that. So it'll be interesting to see what other people's thoughts are about that, and if they're seeing enough done in that field and all of that. We do know a number of people are fighting a number of diseases and are involved in a number of care situations and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what people's thoughts are about that and whether they are seeing enough being done in that space or not. But I would love to hear from the listeners here at the online dinner party. And by the way, I know y'all are missing the quiz. The quiz will be back next week. Your mystery guest will be back. I already know who those mystery guests will be. I've got 2 planned for next week and 2 planned for the week after. I'm already going to have the clues coming. As a matter of fact, I'll start bringing those up on maybe even some of the earlier shows and all of that. Might even give y'all a sneak peek at a clue or 2 and all in that space. But right now I do have a guest. I'm glad to have the guest with me. So I'm going to bring in Mr. Gonzalez and see what he's got going on in his world and all along those lines. I'm always glad to have amazing conversations with amazing people and all of that. So just waiting for my guest to pop in. And I've got Mr. Gonzalez here with me and everything. How are you doing, Mr. Gonzalez?
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing good. I hope things are good where you are. I know I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and we're still having a little bit of a heat wave. It's about I think 91, 92 degrees here and all of that. And definitely, I think it might get into the higher 80s tomorrow and all of that. But I'm actually anxiously waiting for fall to get here, but it hasn't got here fast enough and all of that for my taste. But I just wondered, how are you doing? And is the weather treating you well where you are, and are you ready for fall and all of that? I know I was jokingly saying I have no kids of my own and everything, but I do have 2 nephews. So I know that they are probably, on one hand, maybe excited to go back to school, but on the other hand, they're probably like, wait a minute, you mean summer's over? I got to go back into the real world, the way that we were feeling about leaving the hybrid world and going to regular work, because we do know that people are trying to go back to their regular work jobs. As a matter of fact, I'm at one of mine right now, but there was a time that we were doing the hybrid mix, and there's still people that are doing the hybrid mix, and sometimes it's even the school being hybrid. But how is life in your neck of the world, and how is the weather treating you?
Well, I'm a little bit south of you, so we're just as hot down here in the Florida Panhandle. We do have a nice breeze, though, on occasion, especially right off the Gulf of Mexico, where the winds blow regularly. So maybe it doesn't feel as hot as in other places.
Oh yeah, not at all. It does not feel as hot there, and then definitely have that wonderful breeze. I used to go regularly to a film festival down there in Miami. I miss going there.
Oh.
It's probably been almost a decade, if not longer, since the last time I went to the ABFF, which is the American Black Film Festival. But I used to enjoy going there even though that Florida weather has this one little trend that can be quite interesting, because I do know a couple of times going to watch the movies, because like I said, it's a film festival, so there were movies and parties and all of that. So I might be watching the movie, going to the movie theater, and when I came out, it was a torrential downpour, because y'all do love in Florida,
Yeah.
so kind of like pop-up storms that come out of nowhere.
Well, I want to ask you, since you're from Durham or in Durham, are you Duke or North Carolina?
Neither. I actually went to school with and went to Marquette, so I am actually a Golden Eagle. So I actually went to school in Milwaukee. I have a cousin that went to Duke. I have my dad that taught in UNC, and I have friends that have taught at both. So I usually root for
whoever wins
them against everybody else, and then when they play each other, I kind of like maybe flip a coin. So
yeah,
like
oh, that's interesting. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's real cool. And like I said, it's big time sports here and everything. You know, we've got some pretty decent football teams, but when it comes to basketball, they definitely like to reign supreme, and definitely oftentimes will make it to the tournament. And, you know, UNC lost in the championship this year, but that was Hubert Davis's first year after his past coach had retired. Roy Williams had retired, so he did well. And now we're going to see what Snyder does in his first year, since there was that whole going around the travels as Coach K went into retirement. So Coach K is totally retired, and Mr. Snyder will take the reins, and we'll see how he does in his first year, because it's always interesting when those people come back and all along those lines.
Yeah. Well, both teams had really nice runs last year. Final Four, you know. I know for Duke and North Carolina, the ultimate goal is to win it all, but when they play each other in the Final Four, that's pretty special too.
Oh, yeah, that was very special, like I said, and that was always a big game. I know that a lot of times people were hoping that Coach K would go out with a victory over Carolina, but he actually got disappointed even in his one of the final games at home and everything. Yeah, so he got disappointed by Carolina a couple of times. So I'm sure that the fans of Duke will be trying to target Carolina the next times around as their first year coach. Hopefully we'll have the kind of success that Hubert has as a first year's coach as well. So I know that they are hoping that maybe Snyder can disrupt his second year, since he disrupted the swan song of Coach K and all along those lines. I got a question for you. I know that you're an author, and you know we've met through, because I love meeting people through Clubhouse and podcast guests and a number of other things. But just out of curiosity, because we love talking to authors, we love talking to people in the creative space and everything. Were you always one that knew you wanted to be an author? So were you the kid that was sitting at home writing plays and books, or did this a later discovery in life and all of that? Because I know sometimes people know that they want to go into stuff early. I knew I wanted to go into journalism at a fairly young age, and even did a mimeographed newspaper and everything when I was, I think, in grade school and all in that space. And it definitely worked for my high school newspaper and my college newspaper. But I was just wondering, did you always know that you were going to be creative, and what drove you to the stories that you have told this time around?
Well, it was definitely later in life for me. I wrote my first book in my 50s, and this is my second book. Let me put it up here for you. Flicker in the Water. I had in school, they told me I was a good writer, but I never really thought about writing a book or anything like that. And then I started writing poems, and then after the poems, I wanted to write stories about my fishing experiences and about the ocean, because I've always liked the sea and I've liked fishing. I like the old man in the sea. So I wrote this book about fishing and about the oceans. And I got Mariel Hemingway, the granddaughter of Ernest Hemingway, who wrote The Old Man in the Sea, to write the foreword for the book. And that was very kind of her. And she was gracious enough to do it, and she enjoyed it. She said the book gave her a deep sense of appreciation, and which was very nice.
Well, you know, Ernest Hemingway was definitely a pivotal American author figure. And all of that. Would you compare your own writing style to Hemingway? Because I know a lot of his books were based there in Florida, particularly around the Everglades and all of that area and everything. And if so, what about your style would you compare to the legendary Hemingway?
Well, I took a couple of lessons from him, definitely. His influences all throughout the book. And in The Old Man in the Sea, he calls the old man was unbowed and undefeated, And I took the one line and I said, well, neither man nor fish goes through a full season undefeated unless you're in the 1972 Miami Dolphins. Because, they went undefeated.
Right.
So his influence is definitely felt throughout the book. And I just try to express things as clearly as I can with my own touch, and I think that's what he did too. So there are some similarities there, I think.
Right. What about being an author at a later years was the hardest part for you? Because like I said, I was wondering, did you take a lot of English courses when you were in high school and college? And what was the quote unquote day job? And what have you found to be similar or different from that versus being an author? Because I do know that during the pandemic, a lot of people, had these dreams that they wanted to be musicians or authors or a number of other things. And the pandemic got them to reassess their lives, and therefore they decided that they would pursue those dreams that they had many years ago, whatever those dreams were. And I was just wondering, is that kind of similar to what happened with your books and all along that kind of space, or what would you make the similarity between what you did in your regular life in terms of work and being an author, and what advice would you give to others that want to be authors in later years?
I would say anybody who wants to be an author, study other works from as many different writers as you can, because everybody brings their own way of expressing things to the table. So if you can learn a little bit from each one and then apply it in your own way, I think that's very helpful. I had a professor one time tell me that I wrote really well. I did a term paper on American history, and he really liked it. And that always stuck with me. So in the back of my mind, I always felt that I could do something like this because of what he told me. And, then I just decided to do it one day. And here I am with 2 books published. And I really, really put myself into a flicker in the water. It was because it was very personal to me. It was, mostly nonfiction. There are some stories in there about the sea and things from Christopher Columbus and things like that, but for the most part, they're nonfiction stories that I hoped can bring alive, and I hope help people understand what the ocean is like and what the creatures in the ocean are like. And I learned a lot of things too as I was writing the book that I didn't know beforehand, even though I had spent a lot of time out there. For example, I didn't know the way a lot of the currents in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic Ocean run. There's a loop current in the Gulf of Mexico that comes up from the Caribbean and it wraps around between Cuba and Key West and then meets up with the Gulf Stream and goes up the East Coast. I didn't know they joined. And I also didn't know that sometimes the current barely enters the Gulf before, going between Key West and Cuba. And other times it comes almost all the way up to the Louisiana, Florida coast and then goes down, which is how it is this year. And that the water clarity this year has been super clear, and that's the reason why. It's the loop current.
Wow, I did not know about the loop currents myself and everything. I know one of the other things that I learned about you, and it's actually, you were talking about basketball being king here. There's another sport that is very popular here as well. As a matter of fact, one of our college teams has done, well, actually, I think both of the college teams, but one in particular has done well in the College World Series, that being UNC and all of that. But definitely college baseball is a popular sport here. And definitely UNC, Duke, and even I think State and others have had strong teams and all of that. Ironically, I was talking earlier today to a friend of mine that does one of our shows here called The Gamers Den, because he's in the video game space, but he does the on the field announcing for the Durham Bulls. The Durham Bulls, of course, is the team behind Bull Durham, but also has won several championships in minor league and all along those lines over the last several years. And he was actually telling me how the format has changed, because it used to be that it would be before Major League took more over the minor leagues, that it would be a championship of the East Coast and then a championship of the West Coast, and then they would meet each other. But now, and then I think last year they expanded the amount of games and then determined a champion and all of that. But this year, and I guess it'll be this year going forward, it'll be similar to the College World Series. Only it won't be teams. It'll be 4 teams that'll be playing, and they will pick the 2 best from the East Coast, the 2 best from the West Coast. They'll meet in Las Vegas and determine a champion. So I just wanted a little bit about your own college of baseball background and all of that.
Well, I played at a small school in Pennsylvania back in the 1980s, East Stroudsburg University it was called. We used to travel down to Florida every spring and play in some of the minor league parks around Florida. I had a couple of teammates that were drafted. I don't know if any of them made it to the majors, but a couple of them got drafted. I do have a high school teammate, though, that has a nephew in the Mets organization. He's in the AA now in the Binghamton. He has been up in AAA a couple of times at Syracuse. He's an infielder trying to make it with the Mets. And the Mets are a tough team to crack right now. They're really good, but he's in a good organization, so hopefully he'll be able to make the show.
Yeah, hopefully you'll make the show. I actually was not a baseball fan. My granddad actually was a baseball fan, as I remember, both baseball and wrestling. But I did not become a big fan of baseball until I went off to college. And when I went off to college, I was in Milwaukee. I became a fan of the Brewers, and I've been a fan of the Brewers ever since. And they can sometimes be frustrating because they will sometimes make a run, and then sometimes they'll disappear and fade in the middle, or they'll make crazy trades and do everything else. And then, of course, there's certain teams like the St. Louis Cardinals and others that seem to be a thorn in their side. So it's always interesting having a fan team that you love, and sometimes they can just drive you crazy because they don't want to give you that success that you want them to have, namely a World Series title. And all of those.
The trade they made this year for Hader so far kind of hasn't worked out, but it's, once maybe they'll make a run here in September.
Yes, I hope they'll make a run in September. I think today that they were playing the Pirates, and I think they won yesterday. I'm not sure what they did today and everything, but hopefully they can make a run and catch it. Maybe come in as a wild card if they can't catch the front runner and all of that. But yeah, it is still my hope that they make it, even though sometimes they give me that hope, and then sometimes it doesn't always work out and all of that. That's just the nature of life and all of that. What are some of the things that you felt that you learned as a college baseball player that you have taken into your later life and all of that? So what are some of the traits from baseball that have helped you just as a general human and as a general person altogether?
Well, the discipline and workmanship and dedication to what you're doing. A lot of times things don't go your way. Baseball's a very difficult sport. Even the best of hitters, 300, 3 out of 10, you're a success. So most of the time you're going to make an out. But if you keep persisting and plugging away, and eventually things will turn for you and you'll make it a success. I learned that. I learned sportsmanship and teammateship, and pretty, competition. The competition's always great. So the competition with the fish in the book is I kind of related to baseball and sports throughout the book because they're very similar in a lot of ways.
Well, that's definitely true. I know there's been a lot of conversation lately about climate change, and sometimes the ocean comes up in that, because definitely there's all kinds of things in the ocean, whether that is the plastics that are in the ocean. But then a friend of mine had told me that some of those fishermen nets can be just as detrimental to the ocean as some of the plastic that we have been polluting the ocean with, and all in that space. So I was just wondering your thoughts around the ocean and the ocean's impact on our everyday life.
Well, the ocean has more of an impact on the everyday life than we would think. Like some of those currents I was talking about before, they run all around the whole world, and the climate, they have an influence on the climate, whether they're cold currents or warm currents, and depending on how far offshore, how far inshore they run, they could definitely have a weather impact in your area. And sometimes, if a hurricane or something hits and it happens to get involved in one of those currents, like I said, it could either help it or hinder it, So and just no way of knowing, nature does whatever it wants. I talk about that in the book a little bit too. It's tough being out there. One thing I have never liked seeing anybody pollute the ocean and plastic or throwing cans or bottles or anything like that out there. It's not a garbage dump, it's a precious resource, and I hope we can keep them clean.
I definitely hope we can keep it clean. There's no doubt about it. We definitely need to work on keeping it clean and making it preserved and all along those lines. One of the things that happens here in North Carolina, particularly because we actually have a state river, the Eno River, and all of that. And definitely there are some other state parks and other parks that are very fisherman friendly and very much friendly toward boating and a number of other water activities and all of that. And one of the things that I found, even though I never really had the patience for fishing, but sometimes they say fishing is very calming and relaxing and all in that space. So I was just wondering, do you consider yourself a fisherman and a sports fisherman? And if so, have you found those same kind of calming qualities to it? Because I do know that sometimes people will say that they just love going out there and on the pier and trying to catch those fish. Some people are more fans of throwing the fish back after they catch them. Of course, many people like to use them as part of their diet and part of their daily substance and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, how do you handle fishing? And is it something that you find relaxing? And did you start fishing when you were young? Or is that another habit like the becoming an author that you developed later in life?
No, I fished when I was young. I always liked it from the time I was 7 or 8 years old. I enjoyed it. I would do freshwater back then, and I was catching bluegills and sunnies and catfish and things like that. But I liked it even then. With my dad, we used to go every summer, once or twice. We'd go to New Jersey, and we'd fish for bluefish. That's what they mainly caught over there. Talk about it, and fluke, which I tell stories about both of those experiences in the book. But yeah, no, I've always enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed the water. It's very relaxing, except when it's rough. When it's rough, it could have the opposite effect. You just want to get out of there. That's happened a few times too. But on a calm ocean day, there's nothing better. For me, it's very calming. As far as the fishing goes, when you want to catch fish, it can be a little tedious at times. But once you get that bite, it makes it all worth it. There's the adrenaline rush that you get. It's hard to find that anywhere else. Maybe in sports, but that's about it for me.
Well, and you one of those people that catch the fish, and I know some people catch the fish and like to toss them back out into the ocean. Others want to, take them back home, stir fry them and make them into whole fish dinners and all along those lines. Or do you consider yourself one of those fishermen that like to, like I said, catch the fish, have the fun of catching the fish, and then toss the fish back into the water? Or are you one of those that are probably going to do the fishing for a more practical reason, namely you're going to eat the fish as well?
There's joy in both. I do definitely like to catch fish to eat. Certain kinds of fish are really good. But then there's also a pleasure in throwing them back, and knowing that they'll live to see another day and grow. And so another fisherman can hopefully get him when he's even bigger. But yeah, I definitely I like mahi, I like snapper, I like grouper, I like swordfish, and we catch all of that down here. Right. And you get them in North Carolina too.
Yep.
Yeah.
We definitely get those up here and everything in that space. Is there any particular seafood that you are a big fan of, or a particular fish dish or fish type that you really enjoy catching? I know that here there's a big push to catch bass, and of course there are some other fish that are big around here as well, but definitely bass and trout are big in this area. But I didn't know if there was a certain type of fish that you really enjoy catching for the eating purpose, and if you have any special recipes that you use when you catch those fish.
Well, one of the best, and it's underrated, is wahoo.
Okay.
Wahoo is outstanding. All you need is a little grill and some lemon, maybe a little touch of tartar sauce or mayonnaise, and there's nothing better than a fresh piece of wahoo. I think it's the best. Swordfish is really good too. A nice swordfish steak, they're really good.
Oh, wow. Now I wonder if Wahoo McDaniel, the great wrestler, was named after that fish or not, or whether he was just named after the Native American part of his character, because I'm not even sure that was his true ancestry and everything. But I know that there was the great wrestler Wahoo McDaniel. So I wonder if he was tied in to that fisherman, or it was just part of his native legacy or native character. I'm not sure how much native blood he actually had.
I really don't know. Wahoo, the name Wahoo's been around a long time, so maybe he took it from the fish.
Could have been. He might have taken it from the fish. That would be very interesting. And all that. I know one of the other things that you've been fascinated by just in life is culture and culture in general. So I just wondering what drew you to an interest in culture, what your own cultural background is, and what kind of like things that you found that were fascinating about culture? Because I do know that part of the Everglades legacy is some Native American ancestry
Yeah.
and all in that space. Because I know Ernest Hemingway, I think, was involved in some having friends that are part of that. I actually had a cousin, unfortunately she passed away, but she and her, and I think the kids actually grew up in that area, but they grew up around the Everglades and that area. And definitely, while I primarily claim African American as part of my ancestry, I do have cousins that lean more toward the Native American side of our ancestry. And even in my own family line, we acknowledge that that is part of the line. It's just a matter of who identifies as what and whatever. But I do have some cousins that are very active in the Native American powwows and all in that space. And of course, we also acknowledge that there is European blood that flows through the bloodline as well. But I was just wondering your own interest in culture and how it came about. I'm imagining with a name like Gonzalez that you have some Latin American roots, but you might fool me and tell me that you're German.
No. It's definitely Latin American. My grandfather came from Spain, and then he lived in Cuba for a long time. In fact, actually, he lived in Cuba at the same time Ernest Hemingway did when he wrote The Old Man and the Sea in the 1950s. And then my dad and him and the rest of the family came in the early 60s. They came to New York. So then we moved back down to Florida when I was like in my 20s, like 30 years ago. So yeah, definitely Latin. That's where the interest in fishing came. My father used to fish in Cuba when he was little. He used to do it with a hand line. They didn't have rods back then, rods and reels. They just used their hands. And then we came here, and he took me fishing when I was little. And but yeah, definitely Latin.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember I was there was a time that I was writing a column for one of our daily newspapers, and it was just, I think I might have done maybe 5 or 6 of those columns and everything. But one of them was interviewing a gentleman, a friend of mine who is an artist and all of that, and he was talking about part of the article was talking about the kind of decline in the interest in fishing around the coastal towns of North Carolina. So part of those people, as soon as they get a chance, they are ready to move to the big city or to get the heck out of the fishing environment and are not trying to create any sort of fishing careers. And like I said, this article was probably written about maybe 10, 15 years ago, sometime in that time frame and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that, even as you were writing the book. Did you find that a lot of people, both there in Florida and in other coastal places that you might have visited, that the young people are getting away from that traditional field of fishing and trying to get away from what had actually, in many cases, helped their families thrive? Because I think that we've even seen that in some of the farming communities as well, not just fishing communities, but farming communities also. But I just wanted your take on that, and is that something you've observed even there in Florida?
Well, what I've observed is that people enjoy fishing now as much as ever. I mean, the piers are always full. The beach, people fish the surf all the time. It's I still see people going fishing all the time. I think fishing and hunting is something that's innate in people. It's a natural thing for us to want to hunt and fish and gather. So I don't see a decline in that. I see a decline a little bit in traveling far out in the ocean. But as far as the fishing goes, I think people are fishing off the coast as much as ever.
But do you think that they're still fishing as much as an industry? Because I think that's what I was really talking about, was the fishing industry.
Like commercial fishing or commercial fishing?
Commercial fishing. I know recreational fishing is still popular, but I know there was a time that a lot of people were, just like there were commercial farmers, there were commercial fishermen. And that's what I was thinking, that this guy was thinking there might have been a decline in recently, where some of those families that had grown up, 2 or 3 generations of being commercial fishermen, I guess the newer generation was like, nah, I'm ready to go, try my hand at something else other than fishing, and not wanting to necessarily follow in the family's footsteps. And like I said, I think I've seen that not just in fishing, but also in tobacco and cotton and in a number of other industries. And I didn't know if you had observed that in Florida or what your thoughts were.
Well, I'm not too involved with commercial fishery. I have some friends who do commercial fishing once in a while, and they still go out. I don't know if they go out as often as they used to, but they do still go out. I know that right now there's a lot of regulations, so maybe that's part of the reason why they're cutting back too, because they can't keep as much as they used to, and it's more expensive for them to get all the supplies and everything and go out there. So that's a possibility. But they do go out once in a while.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I can see that. What do you see as some of this? We talked about the fact that you are a college or were a college baseball player, and you might even still play the pickup game every once in a while, even to this day and everything. But what do you see as some of the parallels between regular sports like baseball and football, which is going to start its season now and everything, and sports
And sports what?
fishing?
Oh, sports fishing. Well, the competition in the sports fishing, the competition is between you and the fish.
Mhm.
Just like in the in football, it's between you and the who's ever on the other side of the line of scrimmage, and in baseball, it's between the hitter and the pitcher.
Right.
So and the fish sometimes wins. The fisherman always wins. Like I said, the only time they go undefeated is just, if you're the 1972 Miami Dolphins. That's it, man. Other than that, sometimes you win them, sometimes you lose. Sometimes the fish, a lot of times you think you have him, but you never really do until he's in the boat. You lose most of your fish right there on the side of the boat. In fact, that's what inspired the book, The Flicker in the Water, was the story about a tuna that if you get the book, you'll read all about.
Okay, I have to definitely get that book and everything. You mentioned patience. I know that is a virtuous part of the reason that I sometimes am not the best person for fishing and all of that. But outside of patience, what do you think are some of the other virtues and other good qualities that fishermen have to develop that they can carry on into their regular life and into their daily life, maybe even into their family life if they've got kids and or significant others and all along those lines?
Persistence. I talk about that in the book a few times. If you can persist through the pain that all fishermen experience, just like all of us in life experience, if you can persist when things don't go your own way, eventually they'll swing back your way. And that's pretty much, I think that's the biggest thing for fishing, is to just persist through the slow times, and you'll get them eventually.
Well, there's another saying that is used oftentimes, and I'm still, even at the age of 60, I just hit 60 on July 1, still in that single space and all of that. But there's always that famous phrase that everybody uses, which is, you don't have to worry, there's another fish in the sea, or something like that whenever there is a breakup and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, as one that is a lover of fishermen and fish in general, what do you think when you hear some of those catchphrases that are very popular, like, there's another fish in the sea, or don't be a fish out of the water, or a number of the other kinds of phrases that we hear that use fish regularly in their conversation?
There are definitely other fish in the sea, but let me tell you, losing those big ones really hurts, and you never forget it. And that also happens to everybody. It's always the one that got away, even though there are other fish in the sea. It's the one that got away that you always remember.
That is very true. It's the one that got away, and usually you're sitting there going like, I had that fish on the rail, or even that situation of a romance on the rail, and then you're like, I shouldn't have let that one go. Why did I throw it back into the ocean? And all along those lines.
Yeah. That definitely happens to everybody.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure that happens to everybody. No doubt. I don't know, because I can't remember. It's not in your podcast profile and everything, if you are a parent or not. But if you are, what is some of the things that you learned from being a fisherman that helped you with your parenting? And have you, if you have kids, gotten them to follow in your footsteps? Because you mentioned that your dad got you into it. So I wonder if you've got your others, people in your life into it, whether that be nephews and nieces, or be that your own direct descendants.
I'm not a parent, but I have a nephew who he's expressed some interest in going fishing with us every once in a while. I think we had the chance to do it once or twice, but he's more like he's into technology. He likes the video games and the computers and that kind of thing. But yeah, he still enjoys to go out once in a while.
That actually raises an interesting question. One of the shows we have here on the network, Pod TV, is about the metaverse. And of course, the metaverse is that whole virtual reality, augmented reality, and all of that kind of space. And sometimes when there is something that is such a real world experience, I would argue that definitely fishing is a real world experience, even though I was invited to, but could not get up the courage to do it. Going skydiving is a real world experience. Cliff diving can be a real world experience, and all along those lines. But those that are into virtual reality and into that space will say that you can have that same experience without necessarily being there. So I was wondering, do you think that that is true? Do you think that you could personally have the experience of fishing if you were doing it on the internet, and would it lack something to you if you were not actually feeling the water and maybe the sands of the either the river or the creek or wherever you might be fishing at, but it was in a virtual space?
For me, it would definitely lack. I would need to be there. But, I'm old school, I guess. I don't know how the younger people would feel. But for me, the smells, the sounds that you hear, the energy in the air, they're just, to me, you can't duplicate that. You have to be there.
I agree with you on that. I know one of the other things that I think is definitely in the native culture, I guess some of the Mexican cultures as well, is there's always a connection both to the ancestors, but to the animals as well. So definitely I consider myself an empath, and sometimes even an empath with animals. So I was just wondering, how much do you feel that you are in tune with Mother Nature when you are out there fishing? And do you sometimes feel that you even have like a direct bond and like a spiritual connection to the fish that you are battling and trying to catch?
Oh, definitely spiritual, and definitely bonding with Mother Nature. I talk about that in the book a lot. There's a connection, at least for me, that I feel when I'm out there that you can't get when you're on land. You definitely feel closer to the natural world. You feel closer to Mother Nature, to the animals, to everything, to the Creator. It's amazing when you're out there. It's something that everybody should get to experience.
Yep, I agree with you on that and everything. How important do you think it is for us to have a connection to Mother Nature just in general? Because I sometimes feel that with the quickness of the world, the way that we're always hustling and bustling here and there, that we sometimes lose that connection. And I know that I sometimes like going out and living in an apartment complex, and I like going out and sometimes just running across a bunny or a bird or even a butterfly, and just spending a moment reflecting or hanging out or being in their space. I'm sure there are times that they're looking at me probably going like, why is this man staring at me? I'm just trying to have my meal, and this man is staring at me. But to some degree, it's a bond that I am having with that particular critter and everything. But I was just wondering, how important do you feel it is for yourself?
It's definitely important. Everybody should get to unwind and experience nature. I think it's good for us. Having a pet sometimes helps too, like a dog or a cat or a bird or even an aquarium, but definitely connecting with nature is good for the soul. That's for sure.
No doubt about that. One of my good friends, he's actually a funk musician involved in that whole funk music space and everything. He actually has an aquarium. I think he's named the aquarium. I won't say they're named after news anchors, if I remember correctly. So one of the fish may be Ted Koppel or something like that. But I'm just wondering, as one that is into fishermen and into fish in nature, are you one that can get into the whole domesticated kind of fish, or is that something that you never really had an interest in? And is it two different styles of life, that of being having a tie to the domestic fish versus that of the wild fish?
Well, they're definitely different, but I like them both. I like aquariums, with domesticated fish. They're a lot of upkeep, but they're pretty to look at, and there's still fish in the water. So for me, I still like it, even though the offshore fish are, wilder and they can't be kept in captivity nearly as well. But I like them both.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What made you decide to, what was the first book, and what made you decide to write that one? And what made you decide to write this particular book in particular?
I wrote a book of poems about a friend of mine who was running for office in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I knew all along I wanted to write a book about my fishing stories that were personal to me. So that's what I decided to do. And it's I put my best effort into this one.
Yeah, that makes sense. You talked about poetry, and even at the Cultural Arts Center that I'm at now, we have a spoken word team, and there's actually a team that they compete against every once in a while that is from Florida. So I know that spoken word competitive poetry is very big and has been big now for a while, but so is regular poetry and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, at what point did you find yourself thinking that you were good at poetry, and what style would you say your poetry is like, and have you ever considered doing competitive poetry?
Yeah, I may do that sometime. I've been really busy promoting the book, so I haven't done it yet, but I definitely think maybe sometime in the future I might want to do something like that. There are one or two poems in this book about the ocean that I wrote specifically for the book that I may use in the future. But yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it. I mean, I don't know, I'm not looking at it. Well, yeah, actually, I am looking at it to win if I can, but I'm looking at it more for just to have fun with it.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. And definitely along those lines, are there any other than Ernest Hemingway? Are there any other poets that really influenced your style of poetry and that you really enjoyed? And were you writing maybe even love poems to people back in high school or elementary school, or is the poetry something else that developed later in life?
Well, I like Mark Twain. He uses a lot of humor in his stories, so I got some of the humor in my book from him, it's my own humor, but I know that it works because if he's able to do it, I thought, why not me? So yeah, the humor definitely works, and same thing in the poems. Everybody wrote poems back in school, so yeah, I like some of the poems. Listening to like a rock and roll song or a top song. They're just poems with music, really.
Right.
So yeah. So I mean, if I don't play any music, but if you could do the lyrics, if somebody else could put the music to it, you can make it into a song.
That's very true. You never can tell somebody's watching. Even now, around the world, they may be a musician or a singer, and they may find out about your poems, read the poems, and decide that they want to make it the next big hit. Who knows?
Yeah.
Your next poem could be "The Next Man in the Mirror," which is a Michael Jackson song, or something like that. So they could definitely be something along those lines. What did you yourself decide to? Well, I know because you mentioned why you decided to write the book, but what did you learn while writing the book? Because, like I said, you mentioned patience. I imagine you had to learn how to be patient. You probably had to learn some of those other skills that come with writing a book. But is there anything outside of patience that you learned from the book?
Well, to don't rush it. Do it right. Make sure that you have it how you want it. Sometimes you could come up with better ideas if you let it simmer for a while instead of just writing it down and putting it out there, even though you might be excited about it. Sometimes the better ideas come to mind, and you can make the book or whatever you're writing even better if you give it time.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You can definitely make sure that the book is well done and make sure that it has that kind of time frame and everything. One of the things that this network talks about is the education system and our education system. And I know that both Nikki Palveda and Kim Calhoun, who are two of our founders, oftentimes feel that they wish that we would learn some of these skill sets that we need in life within the school system. I know that they're big proponents of physical education. I think that they're big proponents of definitely creative writing, because sometimes that creative writing can even help you write business plans and other things, and definitely learning civics, because a lot of times we don't even know our state capitals and things along those lines. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts around that? And do you feel that you got a good enough education when you were in school? And do you think that the education system is heading in the right direction, or would you like to see it teach people skills that they need on a day-to-day basis, like knowing how to deal with taxes and everything?
Well, definitely skills that they'll need on a day-to-day basis. When I was in school, it's been a long time now, I felt like my education was pretty well-rounded, and you had a lot of choices. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, I'm not sure how it is because I haven't been in school in a long time, but I know that when I was there, they had art classes or physical education classes or literature classes or music classes, whatever it is that you were drawn to that was available. Hopefully that will continue and expand even more.
No doubt about that. You had the fortunate pleasure of having Mariel Hemingway, as you mentioned earlier, write the foreword. How did you manage to get her to write the foreword, and exactly what did she say in the foreword to the book?
Well, I wrote to her and I told her what I wanted to write about, and she was all excited for it, and she wrote back and she said sure, she would be willing to write the foreword. And she said it gave her a great sense of appreciation. I think by my writing it the way that it did, it helped her understand what her grandfather and her father were doing when they were fishing. She relayed a story about her father when her grandfather was divorced, and he used to visit his oldest son, which is her father, every summer, and they would go fishing. And she tells the story in the forward how he implanted the love of fishing in his son by making him watch. He wasn't allowed to fish until he was, I don't know, like 16 or 17 or something like that. And it instilled that love of fishing in her father. So he fished almost every day of his life in his adult life. And he became the fish commissioner of the state of Idaho. Because of watching his father teach him how to fish.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense and everything. When you told folks that you wanted to write a book, I'm sure that some of your friends and some of your even family members were not the biggest supporters. I know that even in some of the things I've done, there can be those naysayers, whether they are friends or family or even just naysayers in general. So I was just wondering, did you get the support that you thought you were going to get from your family and friends? And if you did not, or even just naysayers in general, whether they were coworkers or whatever, how did you deal with that?
They were pretty supportive. They got more supportive as it went along. I brought them along for the ride, so to speak. But I know that story that you're talking about. It's sometimes family members. I hear people say that they don't support them as much as they wish they would. Maybe it's because they take them for granted, and that could be part of it. But in this endeavor, everybody was pretty supportive. And like I said, the more I did it, the more they came along with it.
Gotcha. Are there any plans for anything new that you're going to work on? And actually, I would love it if you could tell me what you consider some of the better stories that came out of the book. I mean, don't want you to give all the book away because we want people to go out and buy the book as well. But if you want to share maybe a narrative or two within the book that folks may be interested in.
Well, there's one story about a guy I used to fish with a lot. He took a boat one time. He was going to take a boat from Florida and take it all the way down around the Panama Canal and go to Cabo San Lucas for a fishing tournament. And he ran into some really rough water. And he's lucky he escaped out of that situation. And it turned out, everybody was okay at the end. And but it gave you greater appreciation for what they were doing out there. He never did make it to Cabo. He got stuck. Well, he made it to another part of Mexico, Cancun, which is still on this side. Right. And they didn't let him go past where he was eventually going to go. But he turned out okay. And he did have some rough times out there in the ocean, though. But it turned out good. There's that one. And then there's one of the tuna, like I said, that inspired the name of the book. The name here, A Flicker in the Water, which talks. That's a Goliath grouper, by the way, on the cover. That's the biggest of the grouper family. We talk about a tuna that we were fishing some oil rigs off the coast of Louisiana, where fish love structure. They love oil rigs. They love seaweeds to hide under, things like that. And we hooked a tuna, and we fought him for a few hours. And he was a monster. You could tell by the way he was pulling how big a tuna we had. And we talk about that story and different stories like that throughout the book.
Wow, that sounds like some amazing stories and all of that. Definitely sounds truly amazing. Is there any time that you went fishing and you thought you were catching a big one? I know that there's always the story of the one that thinks that they're catching that big fish or whatever, and it winds up being a giant can or like a tiger or something along those lines. So I was wondering whether you had those experiences and if you could share what those experiences were.
Here, we catch a lot of groupers. We catch gag groupers, red groupers. There's one grouper, though, called the scamp. The scamp is not as big as the gag grouper, but when they first bite the line, they call them all bite and no fight. Because when they bite, you feel like you got a real monster on there, and then you pull him up like crazy. And then by the time you see him up there, he's, small, 5 to 10 pounds usually. But the bite is for like a 30-pound fish.
Wow.
Scamp groupers, they call those. You just never know until they're off the bottom what you're going to have. The gag groupers, which are a lot bigger, they fight a lot harder most of the way, but their initial bite is just about the same.
Wow, that's amazing. I know that Mr. Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, had some unusual habits and some unusual hobbies as well. So apparently he was a big fan of a certain breed of cat, and I did not know that until I was doing some research on him in preparation for researching on you as well. And of course, I know that he was also a big fan, or actually survived a couple of plane crashes and all along those lines. And so I was just wondering, among those kind of like things that he was involved in, of course, he had various careers as well, including being an ambulance driver back in Italy, and of course, also working in the military and all along those lines. So I was just wondering, did you, in doing your research and even in writing your book, find some similarities that you had? Like, I didn't know whether you had maybe survived a plane crash or two yourself, or whether you had a love of cats, the way that, and I think it's a particular breed of cat that he really loved and everything, and all along those lines. And apparently he also was a fan of boxing, since he had a boxing ring built in his backyard that he could spar with folks. So I was wondering if there was any of those commonalities that you found that you had, and if so, did you share any of those with Miss Hemingway?
Well, I like dogs.
Okay.
I'm more of a dog person than a cat person. I like labs and I like German shepherds mostly. I know he was a cat lover. Had a bunch of cats. They still have cats in his house in Key West. They keep a lot of those same breeds of cats there for when tourists go there. They can visit and see the same cats that he used to keep there. We love that. We both liked the tropics, the Caribbean. He liked bullfighting too in Spain, and my grandfather was from Spain, so bullfighting was part of the culture that I never did it or went to one, but I can see the spectacle of it, how he would enjoy it. But yeah, I like boxing too. I haven't boxed myself, but I used to like watching Ali Frazier go at it. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, they definitely would go at it all the time, and all along those lines, everything. I'm gonna just take a brief commercial break, and then we'll come back and share a little bit more with you, and we'll continue our conversation and all along those lines and everything. And then I've only got maybe another few more minutes to go in the show in general, but I've thoroughly been enjoying this conversation. I hope you've been enjoying it as well. But we are going to take just a brief commercial break. If you can bear with me a minute, and while we take this brief commercial break, and we'll be right back talking to Mr. Gonzalez, who's got all kinds of fascinating stories that he is involved with and all along those lines. So actually, I did one earlier about leukemia, so I think I'm going to bring up another one about that particular ailment and all of that, since I do have friends that were involved in that struggle and that fight. So I'm going to take a brief commercial break, and we'll be right back.
What we're trying to do here with LLS Pedal is to do something that's never been done before, and that's to match the child to a trial almost in real time. You could imagine a child coming in with relapsed leukemia, and to be able to figure out within 24, 48 hours a new therapy to put that child on and to get that therapy started. That's never been done before.
We've been using the same drugs for the last 40 to 50 years. These are drugs that have been designed primarily for adult cancers, and we've been using them in kids to improve outcomes. And we've probably gotten as much mileage out of them as we can. For many of these types of leukemias that we're treating, we've pushed the limit of toxicity as far as we can. If we're going to make new progress, we need new therapies.
With this initiative, if we are successful, we can bring in massive number of pediatric leukemia patients to answer questions in a few short years rather than decades. And the fact that we have failed to do that really requires for us to change the way we're thinking and change the paradigm.
Pediatric leukemia is actually different from adult leukemia. So the changes that we see in the leukemia cells at the level of the genes are actually quite different from those seen in adult leukemias. So it's really important to actually focus research specifically on childhood leukemias, both acute myeloid leukemia as well as acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I am so excited that the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society is going to support a next generation clinical trial very similar to the adult BEAT AML trial. This trial is actually going to enable a master trial for children with AML and other high-risk leukemias. So as part of this study, really for the very first time, we're going to be able to sequence the gene changes in a child's leukemia and then match those gene changes to drugs in a series of clinical studies.
Without LLS's backing, we could never even dream of a project like this, because this is a huge initiative that's going to require data from lots of different sources and an enormous infrastructure, the likes of which we've never seen before.
I have never been this optimistic as I stand here today. We can do this.
So we're back, and one of the other things I was going to say to Mr. Gonzalez is I also know that Mr. Hemingway set some records. I did not know that, but when I was doing the research, I found that he actually set a record and all along those lines, and apparently he set a world record by catching 7 marlins in one day. And by the way, those cats were cats that have 6 or more toes on each foot, and they are called polydactyl cats. And all along those lines. And apparently he also had a favorite meal, which was a New York strip steak, a baked potato, Caesar salad, and a glass of Bordeaux. So I was wondering 2 things. One, you already talked about the cats and you're more of a dog guy, but have you set any records when you've gone fishing? And is that your favorite meal, or do you have a favorite meal similar to his all along those lines?
I haven't set any records, although we came really close once. I think we caught probably what's the second biggest red snapper in the state of Florida. Not myself. My dad was on the boat on our team. And this is in the book too. We found the spot by accident and we dropped the line. And as soon as we dropped the line with this big fish hidden, we didn't know what it was until it came up. We saw there was a huge red snapper and we had it weighed, and it weighed like 42.5 pounds. And the state record is 46 pounds. So that was pretty close, which was also caught in Destin, Florida, too, the record state record red snapper. I know a guy who was also on board a boat that called the state record yellowtail snapper. The yellowtail is a smaller species. It's only like most of the time they're 6, 7, 8 pounds. They call them flags when they get to be really big. This one was like 11 pounds, and it was caught west of Naples, Florida. He was on board when they caught that. That was back in 2017 or 2016, I think. And the yellowtail snapper and the red snapper, that's the closest I've come to a record.
Gotcha. Why exactly did you call and you might have mentioned it earlier, but I didn't quite catch it. Why is it a flicker in the water? I'm imagining that it was the kind of the surface and the look of that fish as it's skimmering across the water and all of that, but I could be totally wrong, or it could be the way that the sunlight was going against the fish and all of that. But why did you come up with the title Flicker in the Water?
A Flicker in the Water was inspired by that yellowfin tuna that I was telling you about that we fished up in the Louisiana oil rigs. You'll have to read the story to get it, but that's where the inspiration came when, was for that big yellowfin tuna.
Wow. So it sounds like a big time flicker and all that. And if folks are interested in reading the story, where can they find it? Is it on Amazon? And are you part of a lot of fishermen groups, say on Facebook, Clubhouse, and the social media apps? Because I do know that a lot of times people with their different hobbies will find common friends and common people in the different groups, whether that's Meetup, whether that's social apps like Clubhouse or things like Facebook. And I was just wondering, is that something you found yourself joining quite a bit of? And have you found a lot of bonded connections from around the world that are sharing your love of fishing?
I have a website. It's called flickerinthewater.com. Not a Flickr. The website is called Flickr without the A, flickerinthewater.com. There's a lot of interesting stuff about different kinds of fish in the oceans in there. You can email me, or you can get the link to the book is directly there for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, different places. I was talking to someone the other day from Australia who also had a love of fishing. I'm on a couple Facebook groups too. I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff. Look up Flicker in the Water or a Flicker in the Water, and you'll find me all over the place.
It sounds good.
Yeah,
it sounds good, and definitely, hopefully, folks will be doing that. Is there a particular type of fish that you want to catch that you have not caught? And if so, is it in a part of the world that you haven't been to yet, and all of that? So I was just wondering, what is kind of like that holy grail of fishing that you are hoping to catch that you have not caught, or that you have dreams of wanting to tackle? Or maybe you're going to be the guy that's going to find us the Loch Ness Monster.
Well, everybody, most sports fishermen, the king of the sports fishermen is the blue marlin. We've caught a few of them, but nothing, not the huge ones. They get really big, the real big ones. It'd be nice to catch something. If you could have the record in the blue marlin, that would make you the king of sports fishermen. So that's everybody's dream.
Gotcha. There was a time, and I don't know if it's still popular, but there was a time that there was a lot of, well, not a lot, but there was a decent amount of sports fishing shows on television and all along those lines. Is that just something that is still out there? Because I do remember, maybe a decade or so ago, flipping the TV and you would see these different sports fisherman type shows and all of that, whether it was on regular networks or whether it was on PBS. And it's been a minute since I've been paying attention to the more regular networks, because I've been paying attention a lot to, of course, what we're doing here on Pod TV, and of course also a lot on cable, but not watching as much of the standard networks. But I was just wondering, have you found a lot of fisherman shows, and if so, what are your thoughts about those?
There are some, The Wide World of Fishing, George Poveromo, and there's a lot of different fishing shows. I don't know if there are as many as there were like 10 or 15 years ago, actually. You have to find them on cable anymore. They're still out there. Actually, I think you might have a point there. I don't know if they're as much as they used to be, but you can find them still. Jose Wehibi, who's no longer with us, he was big into that. He had a nice show going for a long time. Guy Harvey is another guy who's on TV, and he's paintings and things all over the place. But yeah, I actually, that's a good question. I'm going to have to look into that more.
Yeah, that'd be a good thing to find out. Maybe check into that and everything. Who knows? Maybe we'll bring a fisherman show, and maybe we'll even get you to do it regularly here on Pod TV, since we're a regular network, and maybe we'll bring the whole notion back to doing fish and sports fishing shows. I know we've been talking to somebody about doing an auto show, so maybe we'll get to somebody like yourself and maybe get you a co-host or something like that, and we can bring the fisherman show back and use this network as a tool and all that. Growing up, I was a friend of both the Wild Kingdom and, of course, the person that was behind that and looking at animals and all of that. And I was also a fan of Jacques Cousteau. So I was just wondering, who were some of the explorers that you liked, and are there any explorers that you still like? Because, like I said, I definitely remember watching Jacques Cousteau's Undersea World or something like that. I forget the exact title. And definitely the Wild Kingdom, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom.
Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom. Yeah, I used to watch that all the time myself. Yeah, it was fun. And you learned a lot too. Oh, yeah. I can still remember. I can hear the guy's voice, but I don't remember his name. The narrator.
Right.
And I used to watch Jacques Cousteau also, he learned a lot of stuff from watching Jacques Cousteau. Nowadays, I guess their heirs are, like I said, like Guy Harvey and people like that are heirs to Jacques Cousteau. I'll tell you, I like some of the old explorers. Some are like, I talk about Christopher Columbus a little bit in the book. The stuff that you can still learn from what they did with their ships and everything, and their sailings, because they didn't have a lot of the modern instruments that we use. But those tales of being out on the sea from those times, they're very interesting and they're fun.
Oh, yeah. Is there a particular kind of rod that you like when you go fishing? And do you prefer, because I know that can be a whole different conversation, because some people like the old-fashioned wood rods and the old-fashioned wooden reels and all of that. Do you like some people that like the more electronic type of reels and all in that space? And I was just wondering how you feel about it and whether there is a particular style that you like. And I even know some people that even like the old net style of fishing. But yeah. Did you have a preference to the way you like to fish? And by the way, Marlin Perkins was the person that
Marlin Perkins. Okay. Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah. Yeah. I like for me, the Shimano reels are the smoothest. And I enjoy them. I like the bent back rods, the ones that instead of coming straight down, they bend a little bit at the end. They give you a nice, it helps you hold the rod a little better for me. It takes some of the tension. If you got a really big fish on there, it loosens it up just a bit. But yeah, Shimano's always worked for me. I like them.
That makes sense. Is there a place in the world that you would like to go fishing? I know that there's some people that think that they would like to go maybe fishing on the Nile or in Victoria over there in South Africa. And then, of course, a lot of people think that they want to go into the Amazon rainforest and try to fish in those kind of areas and all along those lines. And I'm sure there are even people that wouldn't mind doing ice fishing, maybe up in the North Pole or the Greenland. So I'm just wondering, is there some places that you are interested in going fishing if you can come up with the funds to go fishing that are global in nature?
They say that Costa Rica is really good for fishing. I'd like to do that sometime, maybe. Panama, places like that. Australia has some really good fishing. They catch fish over there that we don't get over here, The Mediterranean Sea would be a good place to go. Places like that. Even the California coast. I've never fished off of California. Wouldn't mind doing that.
Okay. When you've gone fishing, I know that sometimes when people go on the coast, and definitely there in Florida and definitely even in the Caribbean and everything, there are always dangers as well. Of course, fishing is very much, as we said earlier, a sedentary and a peaceful sport, but there can be predators out there as well. So I was just wondering, when you are fishing, do you ever worry about, say, the jellyfish or the shark or some of those other animals that can be deadly that are out there while you are out there in the fishing space? And if so, or do you just try to like block that out, that they're out there and not even think about them being in the same space as you are? And even some of the more sedentary creatures can also join you and kind of like surprise you. Because I know I've only been on one cruise, and I remember stopping, I believe it was in the Virgin Islands. I don't think it was either Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico. When we stopped at a diner, and literally right next to us, and I've actually had these as pets, was I want to say it was a gecko. And the gecko was just literally, it was either a gecko or a regular lizard, but it was just hanging out there as if almost like the way birds are almost looking for food. I think the gecko might have been looking for something. Not that I fed it, but the gecko was sitting there looking at me like, yeah, you're here visiting. You came on the boat. This is my home. So you're actually the stranger.
When you're on the boat, you don't even think about that. It's as long as you don't go in the water, they won't bother you. They can't really hurt you. There have been instances where fish have been on the line and jumped in the boat. But that's very rare. Most of the time, as long as you're out of the water, you're safe. Although I do tell one story in the book about one time one of the guys had to go in to cut a rope off a net, off a sea anchor, sea parachute, and we brought him back on board. And 5 minutes later, after he got out of the water, I saw this huge hammerhead shark swim right under.
Oh,
but
wow.
But he was nothing happened though. He was already out of the water by then.
Yeah, well, that's good. He was very fortunate, and all along those lines, there's no doubt about that and everything. You mentioned it earlier. That's the other reason I probably am not the biggest fan of fishing, is because I am, I have a couple things I don't do, because I don't necessarily drive either, but I definitely do not swim. So, even though I went on that cruise, I can tell you that while I was walking around that cruise ship, I was thinking to myself, if I fall in or off this boat, I'm toast, because I don't know how to swim. And even if I did know how to swim, that would be a long swim back to shore, or even back to the boat and everything. So I did get a little nervous. I mean, I still had a good time on the cruise and all of that, and enjoyed my visit during that cruise, which is about, I think it was before the pandemic, so it might have been about 3 or 4 years ago now. So I had a good time doing that cruise, but I was sitting there going like, oh, I hope I don't fall off, because this could be a disaster since I do not swim. So I was just wondering, are you an avid swimmer? And if not, is that something that ever crosses your mind? And do you ever go out on the boat with people that are non-swimmers?
I can swim. I swam when I was a kid. I was on the swim team for, growing up, and swimming's always been like second nature to me. Most of the people who I was with could also swim, and we had life vests and all, and things. So that was never a real issue for us.
That's a good thing that it wasn't a real issue for y'all, and all along those lines. So that is just truly amazing and all of that. So get ready to wrap up very shortly. I got a pre-recorded that I'm going to do, but one of the things I do with all of my guests, and by the way, I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and hope to have you come back on again in the not too distant future, and to share even more of your stories, and maybe even another book. By the way, is there another book coming up, and will it be dealing with fishermen and the fisherman life, or are you going to be talking about baseball in the third book, or are you going to be talking about like maybe romance, or are you going to be talking about life in general? What's the third book gonna be?
If I do another book, and this one is still a ways away, I wouldn't mind doing comedy.
Okay.
I think comedy might be a good one to do. But
So
then,
just-
like I said, that's still a ways away. That's just in the just don't think about stages. But
when you say comedy, we're talking about like the comedy of life, like some of the comic things that have happened in your own life, or just kind of like a comedy narrative.
well, both things that are funny can happen to anyone at any time. So whatever's funny, can go in the book.
That's very true and everything. What advice would you give to others that are thinking that they want to write a book? So what advice would you give to the folks that think that they have that book in them? Because, definitely the pandemic opened up many people's thoughts about doing things. And now that we are slowly getting out of the pandemic, more people may be thinking about going into doing their dream jobs, their dream career. So whether they are 9 or 90, what advice would you give to folks that are thinking about writing a book of one sort or another?
If you want to do it, go ahead and do it. The opportunities exist now more than ever to get out there and make it happen. If you feel you have a book in you and you want to do it, I just do it, but do your best effort. Like I say, persist through the pain and be patient with it. And who knows, it could be the next Ernest Hemingway.
It could be and everything. Now, do you get when people make that parallel and they say that you are similar to Ernest Hemingway, how do you respond to that? Because like I said, you do have some similarities. You're both living in the Florida area. You both have a love of fishing. There probably might be some other similarities as well. So I guess that's the next question I got is, what do you see as some of the similarities between you and Mr. Hemingway, other than the obvious, which is fishing and the love of Florida?
The sense of adventure, the sense of just living life to the fullest.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You definitely got to live life to the fullest and need more people to do that regularly. Now, did you self-publish the book? And if not, or did you go the publishing house route? And if you went self-publishing, did you find that to be easier, or did you try to reach out to the publishing houses and they did not give you the love that you wanted?
I self-published it because I retained all the creative control and 100% of the royalties. Also, when you self-publish, when you go to the publishing houses and some of the other places, they retain more of the control most of the time, and usually they take a percentage of your royalties too. So I prefer to do it this way.
That makes a lot of sense. Have you had a lot of other people that have tried to help you in the sense of being like a book agent or a book coach, or even sometimes even those ghostwriters and other folks, editors, and things along those lines? Or do you find it was easier to be a one-man show?
I had people at the publisher helping me out, and some of them came up with some of the phrases too that I used. Like, we would collaborate on things, so they're willing to help if you let them. But like I said, you maintain 100% control yourself. So whatever you can either accept or reject whatever they suggest. But they came up with some really good suggestions. Yeah, we collaborated on one line that said, "Get your reading rods ready. This one is sure to reel you in."
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
So reading rods ready. This one's sure to reel you in. That's very catchy. I like that.
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
Yeah.
Were there any other ones that you remember that were enjoyable?
Well, I told you the one about the Miami Dolphins.
Right.
There's a few like that in the book. You'll have to look and see, though.
Yeah, I definitely have to check out the book and see all along those lines. And that was actually what I was going to wrap it up as we get ready to head into the pre-record that I did about bias and all along those lines. But that being said, and all of that, if you'll share with people your social media and how they can reach you on social media, and something I do with all of my guests is I get them to tell me their words of encouragement, their words of positivity, and things that they would like to our global audience, because we are heard in about 150 or so countries, that they would like to hear from different people around the world, because I am one that believes that we need more positivity in the world. And with all these difficulties that we've been having over the last several decades, we need as much positivity as we can have. So any words of positivity and hope that you want to give to our audience?
Well, yeah, just if you want to write a book, go ahead and do it. if whatever you're passionate about, if fishing is your passion, get out there, and it's never too late to start and learn. Um, one day you'll be glad you did. There's no time like the present to do it. My website is flickerinthewater.com, and there's lots of information there. And Facebook is flickerinthewater.com, and Instagram, and all those good places.
Okay. Is there another, as I get ready to, like I said, go into that other interview that was a pre-record, is there anything that you have not tried that you want to try? I mentioned that I was asked by at that time girlfriend to think about going to skydiving. I did not have that kind of bravery in my heart and everything, so I actually passed. And I've definitely at times thought about doing things like not so much skydiving, but hang gliding. And I've at times thought about things like, well, I don't swim, so cliff diving is out of the picture, but I have thought about getting back into some of my recreational activities like pickup volleyball games and pickup basketball games, and even some getting back into some of my jogging and all of that. But I was wondering, are there things that you have on your wish list that you want to do outside of the fishing and the sports fishing world that you have not gotten to yet?
Well, traveling is always nice. I've never haven't been traveling outside the country that much, but I wouldn't mind visiting some places in Europe, and like I say, Australia, Spain, places like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. Are there any particular fishing holes that you want to go visit? I've heard that like maybe there's some good fishing holes around Scotland, and you mentioned Australia, and you mentioned Costa Rica. Are there any other good world fishing holes that you would like to go that maybe our listeners are from those areas and they can even invite you to those places? So what kind of fishing holes around the world have you heard about that you are interested in visiting and possibly laying a reel into their spots and all of that?
Well, anywhere in the Mediterranean Sea would be nice. The Azores in the Atlantic Ocean are really nice. The Canary Islands, places like that. Costa Rica, like I said. And then in the Pacific, California and Hawaii. Here I come.
Sounds good. So we're going to have to get you to go to those spots and everything. I definitely hope to have you back in the near future, Bob. It's been a pleasure having this hour and a half conversation with you. And like I said, I'm going to bring up my lesser conversation. I think it was about 45 minutes that I did with a gentleman that was in the media about bias and all of that. But I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and hope that you'll come back. And I was very serious. We might have to talk to you about getting a Mother Nature or Fisherman show here on the network, because they've made me kind of the de facto program director. So I'm always open to new show ideas and new ideas in general. So maybe we'll bring back the popularity of fishing shows and have you running around and doing live streams, or a combination of live streams and videos of your different fisherman trips.
That sounds really good, Mark. I enjoyed it as well. And flickerinthewater.com.
Definitely check out flickerinthewater.com and all along those lines. And like I said, we're going to bring up this pre-record idea. You'll see that it is actually going to come up on Twitter, because that was one of the sources that I used and all of that. So I'm going to let Bob go and bring up this interview that we did with Mr. Bean, Eric Bean, who is a professor and deals with the whole notion of bias and what bias is all about, and all along those lines. So you're going to bring that up and definitely have this great conversation with him to share with y'all as well. So I'll definitely see you the next time around, Bob, but don't be surprised if you don't get another call, because we might want to have you back on to share your wisdom, your knowledge, and all of that one more time. So always glad to have great and amazing guests, and definitely Bob was one of those, and I also thought that Mr. Bean was one as well. So I'm going to bring that up right now, and we're going to watch this interview and all along those lines. So I hope everybody will enjoy this as we get ready to play it right now. anything like that, but definitely learned a lot while I was there way back in the early 80s. And one of those conversations was around bias and objectivity. And that's what Mr. Eric Bean is all about. All right, folks, it's another wonderful day here in Durham, North Carolina. As a matter of fact, it's starting to get a little on the toasty side again. Yes, it's definitely starting to get on the toasty side. I think we're over there around the temperatures of the 90s. We were having some breaks in that temperature with temperatures in the 80s. And as you can see in the background, I've got Duke Gardens, and maybe I'll need to take a walk by there since they've got all kinds of shade trees and all along those lines. But you know, one of the things that we talk about often on this show and just in general is media education and a number of other things that I know our next guest is a big fan of having conversations around as well. As a matter of fact, we've got a Media Monday show, and sometimes I'm hoping to get him on that as well, because we oftentimes talk about the nature of social media, the nature of bias, and the nature of all of that. I actually went to school and got a journalism degree from Marquette University, a university that I thoroughly am glad that I got that education, a well-rounded Jesuit education, even though I was not raised in the Jesuit tradition or anything like that, but definitely learned a lot while I was there way back in the early 80s. And one of those conversations was around bias and objectivity. And that's what Mr. Eric Bean is all about as well. So I'm looking forward to bringing him into the conversation and us having conversations about that and all along those lines. So Eric, glad you were able to make it. Glad we were able to have this conversation because, like I said, we do a whole show on media called Media Monday, where we oftentimes talk about what's going on the media landscape. I know that I sometimes get frustrated with the media landscape because, well, a couple of things. One, seems like everybody's got a voice, which can be a great thing because everybody's got a voice, but sometimes you don't need to hear all the chatter because sometimes the chatter can be overwhelming and sometimes their voice can be way wrong. And a lot of times it might be on opinion issues, and you've got a right to either be of one opinion or another. But then there are other things that are just plain factual, and sometimes people want to give you nonsense about factual things. Like the last time I checked, the sky was blue. It hasn't turned yellow anytime recently, but there are some people out there that will swear up and down to you that the sky is yellow, green, or one of those other odd colors and all along those lines. So sometimes I get frustrated about that. And the other thing that frustrates me and has been frustrating me for years is the fact that a lot of our media outlets are basically almost like monopolies, because I came out of the world of radio. And I know that my parents started a nonprofit radio station when I was young because they wanted to hear jazz and blues, which they were not hearing enough of in their regular radio landscape. And they also wanted to give voice to people that might not usually be having voices, be that people in the rural America, be that African Americans, or a number of others in the different spaces that they felt were not having their voice heard. And over the last several decades and everything, it seems like a lot of voices are being heard, a lot of chatters out there, but in the commercial space, not as much, because it seems like if you look at radio, it's pretty much Radio One, Clear Channel, and maybe one or two other players, but there are not that many players in the corporate land. So what you hear in New York might be the same thing that you hear in California, might be the same thing that you hear in Tulsa and all along those lines, because they are pretty much run and controlled and programmed by same said individuals. But just wanted some of your thoughts about what I just said. And how are you doing, by the way? Because I know that I just mentioned it's not, it's all get out here in Durham, North Carolina. And where are you calling in from? And how is the weather there?
Well, you know what? I'm calling in from the Motor City, the Motor
Okay.
City capital of the world, Detroit, and we've had a beautiful summer here, Mark, and we've got some beautiful, less humid over the weekend, and then we're going to hit another 90-degree pocket next week. So, but so glad to be here, and with your opening lead there regarding some of the cookie cutter, national shows and things like that. There's no doubt that local journalism has taken probably the biggest hit, when it comes to the advent of the internet and the dollars that these corporations are willing to shell out. So literally, there is no real solid local journalism these days. In other words, there's nobody out there that's going to local planning commissions, local boards, local municipalities, the very small ones especially. Nobody's covering what's going on there. How are the meetings being run? Do they have a quorum? Are they really using even Robert's Rules of Orders? Nobody seems to know. But 20, 25 years ago, those small towns were covered real well, and there was a lot more news. Obviously, some of the bigger towns are still covered, but the internet echo machine and these corporations, some of them have their own biases as well. They placate sometimes to the advertisements that they bring in, as well as some political, affiliations they might have. So bias is all around, and that's the title of my book, a handbook for inspecting social media news stories. And I can't wait to share more about it with your audience.
Look forward to you sharing more about that and everything. I mentioned that journalism degree I had from Marquette, and I
Yeah.
definitely know that when I was there, one of the things that they kind of drummed into us, I know they drum it into just about every journalism school around the nation and around the world, is this notion of objectivity. And I definitely think the journalists should be as objective as possible, but we all know that we bring our personal biases into whatever we do in life. And I definitely feel that that is the case with the journalists as well. So I was just wondering, is this notion that is taught not just in Marquette, it's taught at UNC. Like I said, I live in Durham, and UNC definitely has a great journalism school. My dad actually had the privilege of teaching there for a number of years before retiring and all of that. And definitely even at Columbia and various other places around the nation that are known for their journalism school and their journalism doctorates. Objectivity is what, but I wonder, don't we all bring our personal biases, whether that's family, whether that's religion, whether that's ethnicity, or a number of other things into what we see? And should we not be having this notion of acknowledging the fact that we might have our own personal biases?
Well, there's no question. We all bring our own personal biases, and it all depends, and how we search for information as well, how we interact with information. So on our book website, biashandbook.com, if you go to the tools page and scroll down, any one of your listeners can take a simple 7-question survey that will immediately tell them how they interact with information based on their inner circle. So we all have an inner circle, and we need an inner circle. These are people that we believe, that we trust, that we've grown up with, because there's just simply so much information out there. We can't absorb it all. There's just too much. So that's why we rely on our inner circle. But here's the problem: if our inner circle does have biases, as well as ourselves. And so people ask me, what's the definition of a bias? Okay.
Right.
So a bias is your opinion. It's your opinion. However, is your opinion based on good, solid information that has attribution and citations, and is relatively up to date? Or is your opinion based on a bunch of editorials? Or are you swayed by people that we call, for example, a halo effect or affinity bias? Affinity bias means that you tend to think like people like yourself, that you might not be willing to be open to other people who don't, look differently than you, act differently than you, might not have the same education with you. So affinity bias and halo effect Those are individuals who, basically, I like to call them yes people, but they sort of tend to, wander with the crowd and go along with the crowd. And we're all victims of that to a certain degree. Okay, but when it comes to just searching for information, anchoring bias, that's, if you want to win an argument and you find a piece of information and you just want to fling it out there, that's anchoring bias. You just search for the first piece of information that comes along, and you're not interested in, determining whether or not it's valid information. You don't take the time to vet it. And we also call that confirmation bias as well. So it just, this first piece of information that comes along confirms your biases, so you use it. So our personal biases most definitely on a daily basis affect how we interact with information. Mark, there are high schools all across the country who are closing their libraries and telling their students just to go on to Google. But if you don't know how to search Google, and you don't realize that you're being bombarded with algorithms that are being paid and bought off by corporations, and you don't know how to vet information, inspect information, then you're not going to get good, authentic, objective information, and so that's why I always carry with me my magnifying glass tool. This is my trademark that goes along with my book, because today people are hastily sharing information in their social networks, and that's what prompted me to write the book. In my own social networks, people were sharing information, and I said, "Did you look at the date of that information?" No. I said, "Well, it's 5 years old, and you're pawning it off as if it's new information." So I hail from Michigan State University. I hold a master's degree in journalism, and I elicited the current director of the School of Journalism at Michigan State University to write the foreword for my 57-page book. So Tim Voss agreed to do that. And he's got some wonderful comments about transparency as well as objectivity. But the bottom line is that objectivity can be it's a type of bias that we all share. You could have 25 people witness what went on in a room, and they might all have a different experience, even though they were all present there, right? So, but the bottom line is that we have tools. We have tools to help us, in terms of what we call outliers, where you can go to see more objective information that hasn't been tainted, and I'm sure in your family history, you could go back years. Many newspapers used to be called the Mirror.
Right.
They were supposed to mirror the news, not sensationalize it. We called LO journalism, right? So, so objectivity, I think that we have a lot of well-trained journalists out there. I think what's happening is that people are getting their information from a wide variety of different sources that may not be professionally trained journalists.
Yeah.
And that's the problem because of the internet echo machine.
No, I definitely can agree with you on that. As you were talking about 25 people in a room and all of that, it seems to me that I remember a famous academic exercise. I don't know if they still do the exercise, but it was kind of like that you would give somebody a piece of paper, give them something that you wanted them to pass around the room, and they would have to pass it around conversationally to the people and all of that. And a lot of times, by the time it got back to the original source, the entire message had been totally changed and all along those lines. So I do remember that.
And that goes back to when we were kids and we would sit around in a circle and play telephone. Right. And you would whisper someone in their ear, and by the time it comes full circle. And we talk about that in our book, because with the internet echo chamber, that happens all too often. It's just so magnified. Several years ago, before the internet, there were fewer choices in the media. And so overall, I believe that, the news that we received was less filtered, and was generally a little bit more accurate. Today, with so many competing factions, for airtime, so many competing factions in journalism, as well as all the social networks and people who can set up their own professional television stations 24 hours a day. And we all should have a voice. That's a good thing. But when we have a voice, we need to inspect that voice for that objectivity. And we do that through a number of techniques. We do that. We examine how much attribution they bring into the conversation, how many citations, how old are those citations, how new are they, how reputable are they. And so in the back of my book, I have a one-page bias assessment form where you can take any piece of information and score it for conflict of interest, for the number of fallacies it might contain, and your personal biases as well. You've got to score that into the equation as well. And so there really is nothing else out there available to anybody. But before we continue, Mark, I just want to let your viewers know that, from my many, many years of teaching journalism and English composition in higher ed, in many forms, I discovered that there are 7 sources of all information that we're being bombarded with. So immediately, when we get a piece of information, no matter where it comes from, a podcast, radio, television, newspaper, a video, a TikTok video, on Facebook, we can divide it into 7 types of different sources of overall bias. And I'm here to tell you what those 7 sources are. And there's no particular order. They're academic, government, for-profit, nonprofit, hidden agenda, watchdog groups, which are like nonprofits, as well as individuals like you and I. Okay. And so immediately when you get a piece of information, you want to say to yourself, well, what kind of information is this? And then, I also believe that probably the majority of the information, and I haven't done any hard, fast research on this, but I think the majority of the information floating out there is either for profit, because we live in a free enterprise world, and it's bought and paid for through Google and other networks, or these days, there's just a many individuals out there, and publishing information. So we need to definitely segment it and to understand it. I'm not saying that all these categories are bad biases. No. But what I am saying is that when you get a piece of information, stop for a second and use critical thinking and say to yourself, what am I looking at here? How many could this information have to do with more than one category? Could it be a for-profit and an individual? Could it be a nonprofit and a government source combined, right? And then what kinds of overall biases do they bring? In the academic world, there's something called publish or perish. Right. If a professor wants to be promoted, he's got to publish. So there's a lot of pressure on professors to publish information, and it's peer reviewed. And, we hope that the peer reviewed people do a thorough job of reviewing it. But there could be some biases there, because there could be some cronyism. If you look at their sources, they tend to publish papers from the same people that they're more familiar with. Now, again, I'm not saying this across the line. There are new publications. There are new people getting published all the time too. But I'm just telling, your listeners to, think, take a step back. And, the book that I created, and I have to thank my editor, Sherry Wexler, and my amazing illustrator, Gail Gorski, who took the time. All the illustrations in the book are hand cut out of paper. I think your audience will simply be mesmerized by the detail of these paper illustrations that actually depict what's going on right now with the algorithms, and what we should be aware of with hidden agendas. And Mark, let me also state this, that all of this is tied to our mental health. Imagine that.
Yeah,
it's all great. Yeah,
that mental health aspect is very important in everything, and I was actually going to get to that as we were getting ready to talk about this for a matter of minutes and everything. But one of the things that you were saying that I was curious about your thoughts and everything, and thinking as to whether you agree or disagree, but when I was growing up, there was a certain anchor that ended his news all the time with that catchphrase, and that's the way it is, and everything. And definitely, I was a fan of Walter Cronkite, just like I was a fan of Charles Kuralt, also a fan of what some people might call guerrilla journalism, or definitely a different kind of journalism where they would embed themselves into the story, because I am also a fan of Hunter S. Thompson and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, do you think that if Walter was in the news media now and was around, that he would be able to have the kind of success that he did in the 60s and 70s? I mean, he was talking some real hardcore issues like Vietnam, like the Civil War, like a number of other things, but it did seem like the journalists of that time had a greater deal of respect from the overall public than I would argue they have now. So I was just wondering, do you think
Yeah.
that Walter Cronkite could survive in the 21st century?
I think Walter Cronkite would be very well aware of the social media networks that we're surrounded with. I think he'd be very well aware of the algorithms that control a lot of the information we see on our smartphones. He'd be very well aware that any app that we download that we may not be familiar with, could have a hidden agenda and could be, sucking information out of our phones. And so, but I think some of the, the head anchors right now, and, NBC, ABC, CBS, I do think that they are, in tune with what's going on today. But I remember the situation with Dan Rather, and I remember he was reading, some news right off the teleprompter, but he hadn't familiarized himself with the story. And, and he was reading some bad information that he was just being fed. But he was one of our great journalists who brought the Vietnam War into our living rooms, along with Walter Cronkite and so forth. But yeah, I think we still have a level of sophistication like that today, with those main stations. But certainly what's happening today is that because there's so many individuals out there sharing information, many people aren't being selective. They're not, they're just kind of comfortable getting their information from their inner circle, or they're just comfortable getting the information from, other sources. And, we need to broaden our sources. We need to find some new avenues today. And the book suggests, where you can go to get some new information. And then the other thing is that we can always go to our local municipalities, for example, and find out exactly, what went on at the meeting. And if we want to know what a law is, they're the place to go to get the actual wording of the law, because we can't rely on the media today, to necessarily explain to us, all the particulars of the laws that are in our neighborhoods that might be passed on a weekly basis, because that's where, all of these rules get placed, at our local municipalities. Yeah.
No doubt about that. And you mentioned the inner circles. I've actually not been attending as much as I used to, and I might go back in this weekend. But there was a time frame, I would say probably a couple of months ago, and definitely over several months, that I was very active in Clubhouse and was very active in that space, in that social media outlet. And definitely there were some people that were talking news stories and doing all along those lines. But when it comes to your inner circles, one of the things that I observed that I did not like, and other people also did not like it as well, and they've complained about it, whether it's Clubhouse or whether it's Facebook groups or a number of other things, is that sometimes when people get a little bit of power, then they kind of abuse that power. And that can be the case of what happens with moderators in different groups, be that Facebook groups or be that Clubhouse spaces or a number of other things that exist in there. So I was just wondering, what kind of advice would you give to people to deal with that? Because I do know that there are people that might want to bring up issues, whether it's around abortion or Black Lives Matter or the vaccine or a number of other things. But then when these people were made moderators, sometimes that whole notion of having power went to their heads. And so they didn't always let people go up to their room to bring their point of view, or their point of view disagreed with them, they might rudely kick them out, and all along those lines. So we do know
Yeah.
that.
Well, so that's why I've got my civil discourse man right behind us there. You can see my civil discourse biker. He's featured in the book in the last chapter because, you know, where is the leadership to help people not only vet information, you know, where is the leadership to remind people that we need to go back to civil discourse?
Right.
So I like to remind people that we're all responsible to use information with prudence and goodwill. Information is a powerful tool. And, you know, when I mentioned earlier about the mental health aspect, you know, anybody in a position, you know, who's sending out information to a large audience, if you've got a large viewership, large readership, you know, you have a responsibility to be objective. And you have a responsibility to emulate the best in civil discourse. And right now, you know, for whatever reason, over the last few years, you know, I don't know if there's been other leaders, but people have been given permission to just, you know, say with vulgarity, colorful metaphors, you know, anything that they want for the shock value of it. But I think we can win an argument with good old fashioned, you know, research, good old fashioned, good statistics, rigor, and finding, you know, the information that's more valid, more objective, more authentic, and transparent. And those are the types of people I would rather listen to than somebody who's got the floor and becomes a behemoth with that floor. You know, we all need to be gentle giants these days and be careful because, you know, we're holding stewardship over this information, especially if we have a large audience. And so when we talk about the mental health aspect, the book talks about Festinger in 1957. He came up with the theory, cognitive dissonance. And what that means is cognitive dissonance is that we behave differently than our thoughts. And so I like to say,
hold on one second, because that's actually going to a question I was going to ask you, and it may fall into what you're talking about. Because I've got a show that I do. It's a news show and everything. It's actually the one we do every morning, Monday through Friday, from 10 to 11. And one of our regular panelists, sometimes after we have talked off the air and everything, will admit to me that he sometimes says things that he may not necessarily agree with, or that he even personally believes in and everything, but he does it in a way to elicit a reaction from me, and he does it with others as well. So I was just wondering, do you think that part of cognitive dissonance and the whole model, the whole dialogue things that we are seeing in the world, that we're seeing more people that are doing this, that they are stating things that they may not have a 100% belief in, but they are doing it for the reaction sense of whoever they are talking to and or debating, because sometimes these conversations are into debate as well.
Sure, absolutely. You know, here's the thing. We got to remind viewers, we have to remind them, look at the context at which the information is being presented. There's a difference between the, you know, NBC nightly news and a talk show.
Right.
So, you know, and when we look at Fox News and we look at their main news segments, you know, when they're reporting on a fire or an earthquake or something along those lines, that's different than the framework of a talk show.
Right.
And so in talk shows can be sensationalized. You know, they're not straightforward news, you know, news hours, for example. Right. So it all depends on the context of which the people are flinging out the information. You know, that's first and foremost. But when we get back to cognitive dissonance, Mark, I think of, for example, you know, if you run into a theater and you scream fire, and I hope nobody would ever do that if there's no fire, but if you did do that, you know, you would be arrested if there was no fire. You know, that would, you know, a horrible joke, right? But so I'd like to think, in a way, if we share information that could be dangerous information without vetting it, without putting it under, you know, the magnifying glass, if we share this information, okay, that's dangerous. That's a dangerous affair to share, you know, information or to direct people or tell people what to do. especially if you haven't validated the sources or, and done your due diligence with that. And so that's where I like to think that people should experience cognitive dissonance. They should have this unsettling feeling. When that person that you interviewed said, I'm sharing information I might not believe in. But we should be sharing information we believe in. And if we don't believe in it, we should tell our audience, I'm sharing information right now you might find interesting. I don't personally believe in it, but people are talking about it out on the internet. What do you think about it, right?
Right.
So, but getting back to cognitive dissonance, another example is that if you eat a high-fat meal and it's bad for you, you might feel like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I don't feel good about that, right? So, but it's the same thing with information. I think at the end of the day, we need more people checking in with their mental health and asking themselves. We think of some recent cases of some of these shock jocks who
Right.
said, Sandy Hook never occurred, right? And then they admitted, finally in court, that it occurred.
Right.
It's unbelievable what people will do to get the ratings, to just, say anything to say anything. So it all goes back to, I guess, Howard Stern, who started it all off by just saying whatever he wanted to say. But after a while, we knew what his MO was. We knew that he was probably just doing it for fun. It was framed under that context, right?
No, it was totally framed under that context. And that's kind of what I was alluding to, because sometimes you can ask people, whether structural racism exists or does not exist. And there are sometimes that folks might say that it doesn't not exist, but then after you talk to them later, they may admit that they have had their own experiences with it, but they might want to put it into context as if it is a universal statement that it doesn't exist, even though the evidence shows that it does in a different forms, whether that's banking, whether that's housing, or a number of other things. But that's one of those kind of things that sometimes people will take a side of an issue that they don't necessarily believe in. And that was just one example that I can give it everything. But, I did take your test question, and I actually cheated because I actually did keep some of my answers and everything, because some of the questions that you asked were actually very interesting, and I was pleased by some of my answers, but I was also curious as to why you asked some of the questions that you asked. And I do hope people do go and take that 7-question test. I took it. I found it quite interesting and everything. And a lot of the things I definitely was glad that I gave those truthful answers, because I definitely tried not to just depend on one media source. And I know that that's one of the things that you asked. But then you got to a question that was like a third question. And this one is one that I had to think about heavily. And I was just curious as to what your kind of reactions have been to this one. But you had asked the questions about the inner circle. And we've been talking about that inner circle through the course of this interview. And one of the questions you asked was, do you ever kind of like hold back on your answers or your own opinions because you don't want to upset the person by disagreeing? Now, I'm one of those people that I will go ahead and tell people what I've got to say, and if they disagree, we can just agree to disagree. And that's actually one of my favorite statements that I give to even some of my folks that are cohorts on this network or interviewers and all of that. And I also will say that I sometimes will also give people a chance to give their opinions, even though I may have no belief in it whatsoever. Like, I've had the pleasure or an interesting experience of interviewing what some people would call conspiracy theorists and all of that. And, whether they want to say that we never went to the moon, or that the world is being controlled by a very, very super elite, or a number of other things that I may not be willing to personally buy 100% into and everything. I also believe in giving people a chance to express their views and let the audience make the judgment as to whether those opinions are valid or not. But I just wonder your thoughts about that, and also your thoughts about why you were asking that particular question, because that question actually did catch me a little bit. Another one that I asked about as well.
So, no, yeah, I was really asking that question. This is sort of like, it goes back to and this has happened to all of us, with maybe with our family, You're going to go over to an uncle's house for Thanksgiving,
Right.
and somebody says, don't bring up politics, don't talk about the coronavirus, don't talk about the 2020 election, don't talk about the mistakes the CDC made that they finally admitted to, any number of issues, because you don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
Everybody wants to have a nice dinner, and you can't blame them, right? Because people can get very passionate about certain topics, and people are passionate about who's in the White House, obviously, because we want our country to be run a certain way. People are very passionate about how they take care of their health. They're very passionate about how much they spend at the supermarket. We all need to be aware of these things, with the economy, and getting good, clean information. So, but the question is, you don't want to rock your inner circle by disagreeing with them. It's hard. It's hard to disagree. So I would say, though, you could disagree with your inner circle if you've taken the time to properly vet the information and bring up to your inner circle. But if you're in a situation where your inner circle, can become uncivil, and they can't handle varying opinions and varying pieces of information that could be valid pieces of information, then you may not want to rock the boat. So on and so forth. But, at the end of the day, we don't want to necessarily make enemies of our inner circle, but, we may be, scrolling around, rolling around, if you will, with people who, we've just taken for granted, we agree with what they've been saying all along. But, today, like we say in the back of the book, Mark McCaslin says in the back of our book, question everything. Now, I'm not saying everything is a conspiracy theory.
Right.
No. But, we can't live by conspiracy theories on a daily basis. We have to live with the information that's available to us right now. And certainly if you can get more information directly from the horse's mouth, as they say, that's going to go a long way than, sources that, might be filtered and watered down, so to speak. But so that's why we had that question baked in, because we just wanted to see how, if you're being controlled by your inner circle, or do you have a voice in your inner circle? And I've only got about 5 more minutes here in Detroit to wrap it up.
I know you gave me a limited amount of time, so I appreciate that, and hopefully we'll get you back on some of the other shows and everything. But one of the things I was curious about, and all along those lines, is that there are a lot of issues that are out there that are very legitimate sides on both sides of the argument. So I was just wondering, I definitely agree that you should vet both sides, but how do you go about vetting it when there are legitimate viewpoints? I mean, I can think of things like abortion. I can definitely think of things like the death penalty. I can even think of things like affirmative action, that you can make a legitimate argument and a legitimate factual argument on both sides of the conversation. So I was just wondering, from a bias and study of bias standpoint, how do you deal with that and all along those lines?
Well, you know what? So in the 1980s, the FCC had a sort of ruling that, time will be provided for opposing views on local television stations. You may remember that. I think there was even an All in the Family episode where Archie Bunker came on at the end to his view. But what happened is that not only could there be 2 sides of a story, or 3 sides of a story, or 10 sides, there could be 20 sides to a story, and there simply isn't enough time to bring everybody on at the end of the newscast. And so since then, the FCC has kind of nixed that, but we all deserve a place where we can, state our opinions. But again, our opinions need to go back to, vetted good information where there's a trail of published information that's, rigorous, that's valid. My book explains how you can get at more valid information. There are databases that we can go to that have already taken the time to filter information, without any politics necessarily baked into those databases. This is just pure information. So on and so forth, but really, what it comes down to today, before I sign off here in the
Right.
Detroit area, and I wish I had more time for you,
Yeah, I
Mark.
wish I had more time too.
Yeah.
One of the things I was getting ready to just give us a counter to that, and definitely don't want. I know you've got limited amount of time that you can
Yeah.
give me, but I do know that a lot of times when we think about these conversations, yes, there's a lot of things that we can peer review and that we can get factual information about,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of other things that are personal to that person. Like I said, I unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, I'm still in that single space, even though I hit 60 back on July 1 and everything. But if I was involved with a woman and maybe a younger woman and we were about to have a child and they had health issues and we had to have an abortion and all along those lines, I would definitely probably defer to her because I do believe in a woman's right to choose and all of that. But I'm just saying, but there are things that she would be going through that I am not personally going to be able to experience because one, I'm not a woman, and two, I'm not the one personally having
Yeah.
the baby. So that's like a personal
Right.
experience that I cannot identify with all the time. I'm sure that whether they're in Detroit or whether they're in Durham, there may be even some of your African American students that you have at Michigan State that are telling you about their experiences growing up that you may not be able to relate to because that was a different environment than where you grew up and all
Well,
along those lines.
and Mark, that's it. We use information based on how we think it can help us. That's what we do intuitively. I like to think, and I could be wrong, maybe some might disagree with me, but we vote people into office that are going to help us economically. We vote people into office that agree with our philosophies, what we think about abortion and all these other very heated issues. So then we tend to surround ourselves with information that goes along with our philosophies and our personal biases, of course. So, but when we're just talking about, what exactly went on, yesterday at that event, we should be able to get good, clean information about what went on at that event. That there should have been people there. Back in biblical days, the Hebrews had a scribe everywhere. That the scribe was recording everything. And hopefully was, mirroring it and not sensationalizing it, as he or she was going along. So, but no, I wish we had more time to talk
No,
about
we should have
that.
more times, and definitely I want to bring
Yeah.
you back both on the media
I'll come
show
back again.
and other shows as
Yeah.
well. Last thing that I get everybody to do, and hopefully you can do it within the 4-minute or 3-minute time frame, is if you'll tell folks how they can reach you about the book one more time, and everybody that I have on the show. I'm a big supporter because it is a global network of messages of positivity and hope. So any message of positivity and hope that you can give to our global audience, that is the last two things that I would ask. One is how they can find you and get this book of yours, and two, any message of positivity that you can give our audience.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, my book, Bias is All Around You, a handbook for inspecting social media and news stories, is a nonprofit effort. It's a nonprofit effort, and it goes to a mental health organization, a 501c3 that I started here in Michigan, to help children with autism. And it's a book that gives everybody from all walks of life the tools to learn how to better critically think. A lot of times, people don't naturally want to be told how to assess information, but information can outsmart anybody regardless of our education.
Right.
And so we all need to take a step back. We all need to be good stewards of information. And I believe we can do this one at a time. I think we can do this one at a time. And that's the message. The book's available on Amazon. The book's available in Barnes & Noble. You can get a hardcover edition. You can get an Audible version of the book, 72 minutes unabridged for only $6 on Amazon. And it's also available in a Nook, in a Kindle download. Some libraries across the country have the book, the Los Angeles Public Library, the Brooklyn Public Library. Many libraries are starting to get the book. But please help us spread the word and ask your library to pick up a copy, because libraries can order the book through Baker and Taylor as well as Ingram. And those two distributors, they cover all the libraries, they cover all the retailers as well. So, but it is a book from our nonprofit effort, and I hope people will consider it and put it in their library. We've gotten great reviews from the Midwest Book Review, Kirkus Book Reviews, and all up and down. And I'm so grateful, Mark, that you asked me to come on the show, and I'll look forward to coming back again.
Yeah, I look forward to having you back again, and maybe in the next time I'll even have you talk a little bit about your background and passion for autism. I actually just did an event, I believe it was last year, with a friend of mine who actually have a thrift store that deals with autism, and I think she's in the process of hiring and has already hired some folks that are in that space and in that spectrum, because that is what it is an effort to bring awareness to autism, and Crystal is very much involved with that. So she has a thrift store, I think it's called Real Works, if I remember correctly, in that area of Raleigh, which is adjacent to Durham and is our capital city. So definitely have other friends that are in that autism space, and even myself have dealt with some of that, having discovered in my adult years about dysgraphia, which is like a form of dyslexia. It just means that part of the reason that I don't drive, and part of the reason that if you tell me left or right, it might take me a little bit longer than the other person to figure out which way is left and which way is right. But it definitely was discovered way after my college education, and definitely throughout my elementary and other educations as well. So I want to say it was in my late 20s or early 30s when it was diagnosed, and all along those lines. We'll definitely have to have you come back and share some of your thoughts around mental health and around autism also.
I'd be delighted to do so, Mark. Thank you very much for having me on today.
No problem. So we're going to hit the 30-second marker to get on out of here. And like I said, it has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm looking forward to having Eric back on Pod TV, maybe on our Media Monday, as well as some of these other shows that we do here as well. But definitely looking forward, and hope that y'all learned a lot and might even think about your own bias. Like I said, we all have our own biases and our own ways of dealing with media. So Eric brought up some good points, and I hope that y'all were listening and learning from what he was saying. And hopefully we'll be having him back on the network in the not too distant future, sharing even more of his education and what he has learned. But right now, let's get this 30-second clock on out of here. Are you looking to fine-tune your exercise regimen? Then you definitely want to get in touch with Tony Markham, certified water fitness instructor and personal trainer. She can come to your pool. Did you know that water fitness improves flexibility and strength? Give her a call. The Drill Sergeant helps you with all your fitness needs. Call 919-612-6077. That number again, 919-612-6077.
It's time for you to start bossing in social media. For all your social media needs, you've come to the right place at the right time to get your website designed, landing page, social media platforms, and get the training you need to get in front of the people that's ready to buy your products and services. Let me train you with StreamYard, Zoom, Clubhouse, and much more. And let me help you get your virtual professionals, not assistants, because assistants can only assist you, but the virtual professionals can give you that professional flavor that you need to expand your reach and increase your revenue. Jump on in and get in where you fit in and start bossing today.